And the next game on the list is Kameo Elements of Power. This action-adventure brawler was made by Rare, makers of GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, Donkey Kong 64, Donkey Kong Country, and Perfect Dark. After Nintendo chose not to acquire Rare in 2002, Microsoft swooped in and bought the company for $375 million, forcing them to pivot away from creating games for Nintendo consoles. Rare ended up making 2 games for the original Xbox, Grabbed by the Ghoulies, a 2002 mediocre adventure game, and Conker Live and Reloaded, the remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day that for some reason is even more censored than the Nintendo 64 version, but at least it had this really awesome third-person online shooter mode. Kameo Elements of Power was first conceived for development on the Nintendo 64 before pivoting to the Nintendo GameCube and eventually to the original Xbox after the acquisition. Rare completed the game and had it ready to go for the original Xbox, but it was so close to the launch of the Xbox 360 that Microsoft asked them to delay the game until the Xbox 360 could be ready so that it could be one of the launch titles. This allowed the team to go all out with the visuals and with the audio quality. It's the first Rare game to include an original orchestral score, and it sports these vibrant colors and tons of on-screen detail that weren't really common at the time. This was definitely a next-gen platformer experience in the Rare style. Most of the footage you're going to be seeing for this review is actually recorded from my Xbox One X. I bought 2 different copies of Kameo on the Xbox 360, and neither of them would play in my Xbox 360, so I decided to just play it on the backwards compatible version that's on the Xbox One X. It looks freaking gorgeous, it runs so smoothly, and I'll sprinkle in some footage from the Xbox 360 along the way so you can see how certain sections looked on the originally intended hardware. Kameo tells the story of a 16-year-old elf girl that gets betrayed by her older sister Callus when Kameo is chosen over Callus to inherit the sacred power to shapeshift into these elemental creatures. Callus goes wild, partnering with the evil trolls and unleashing these shadow troll things that capture these tiny little baby versions of the elementals. Kameo goes on a journey to rescue these elemental sprites and use their powers to save her aunt, her uncle, and her mother that were all kidnapped, and finally to confront Callus and the big bad troll king, Thorn. Along the way, Kameo is guided by the village mystic and this talking book that's called The Whatnot. This one is just a super generic fantasy adventure story with this twist that Kameo can transform at whim into these different creatures and use their powers to platform, fight enemies, and solve puzzles. I gotta admit, I never played this one, so I always thought that this was just a platformer from all the cover art and the way it just looks. Like, for some reason, I thought this was a platformer. So when I booted this up and I started to play it, I was pretty shocked to find that it's actually more of a brawler with a heavy reliance on shapeshifting into these elementals. There are 10 elementals in total. Each is a pretty unique character design. And really the question here is, how much LSD were they on when they made these characters? To which the answer would be yes. You can switch between the elementals on the fly. To do so, it's mapped to the face buttons X, Y, and B. You can either go into the Whatnot to the elementals page, hover over them with the mouse cursor that you control with the joystick, which I always hate when they do this, or you can just hold down one of the buttons to bring up this radial menu in order to map them to which of the face buttons you want them to be mapped to. It's really awkward to change in the middle of combat when a new enemy type shows up and you start fumbling to find the one correct elemental that is able to counter that enemy type. More than anything, it's a puzzle game, and as I mentioned, the combat also has this puzzle-solving element. You have to switch between the different elementals and use their unique attacks and powers to defeat the different enemy types, like using this plant thing to knock the armor shell off of these guys, or using this one to spray water on these little dudes that run around and are invulnerable unless you spray them with the water. Or you end up rolling around as this rock dude and you can lob rocks over the top of shielded enemies so that they can hit the trolls in the back when the rock returns to you. Outside of combat, you'll be swapping between the elementals to figure out how to traverse the world. And as you unlock more elementals, you end up needing to chain together different elementals on the fly in order to complete some of the platforming challenges. For example, you'll come across a ramp and you'll use this guy, Major Ruin, to roll up the ramp, jump into the air, and then while you're in the air, you'll switch to the Yeti, Chilla, to grab onto the ice wall and climb it. It's a pretty fun setup for a game. It looks great, but I think it just fails in execution. I found it pretty difficult to remember which of the 10 elementals do what, and the environmental puzzles aren't that intuitive, like this section where you're expected to pick this plant, throw it at a tree with these hanging pepper looking things. and you make this big troll slam into the tree to knock down the pepper. Then you pick up the pepper and you drop it into one of these geysers to cover the hole. And after all the holes are covered, the door opens. This isn't so bad, but this is the first and the only time that you have this mechanic of luring an enemy into one of the trees to knock something down. And you have to do all of this as Kameo and not as one of the elementals, which is really one of the main problems that I have with this game. You never really need to spend time as Kameo, so by the end of the game, you don't really care about her or her character, nor do you really feel like you're playing as her. Instead, you're just bouncing between these elemental creatures for about 95% of the game. The only time that you're really playing as Kameo is in these sections where you're fighting one of the shadow trolls to free one of the elementals. And for these fights, it's always the same arena, the same cutscenes at the beginning and the end, and the same combat encounter. The camera goes into this basic inverted composite mode, then these other shadow things pop out. You kick one of these little shadow things so you can walk up to grab them, then you throw them at the shadow troll. You do this 3 times and you defeat the shadow troll. You'll do this entire combat encounter about 10 times to unlock all of the elementals. And anytime you're out in the world fighting an enemy or you're doing a puzzle, the Whatnot book will not shut up whenever you're trying to solve what's going on. He constantly pops up saying that he has a tip or advice for you and asks for you to open the menu to talk to the cover of the book. If you think about a more recent example of this, remember how annoying Mimir and Atreus and all of the companions are during the puzzles in God of War Ragnarok? Yeah, those are nothing compared to the Whatnot. This makes it a laughably easy game. You're always able to figure out what you need to do by just going to the Whatnot. The combat is just button mashing until all the enemies are dead, and it's so easy that I completely forgot about the system where you can actually purchase upgraded abilities for each of the elementals. Other than a few upgrades needed to beat very specific challenges, you don't need to buy any upgrades. I only remembered that I could buy upgrades during the final sequence, and I finally spent the upgrade fruit currency to get more HP and mana. And this fruit currency is only one of 3 collectibles in the game, which really came as a shock to me because, I mean, this is Rare we're talking about. This is the same company that ingrained in me that I should be forced to forever play games without exploring every nook and cranny just to find that last collectible. The story is also a mess, mostly because of the game's design. You never really get to know Kameo, so you never really care about her journey. The Mystic and the Whatnot have some pretty funny interactions, but they aren't together on screen very often. In fact, there's not a lot of characters or dialogue or cutscenes that really help explain the story or have you walk through the story. You're kind of just going from one shadow troll encounter to the next in this land, and it doesn't really all fit together. At the end of the game, you'll assault the evil troll's fortress and eventually his airship in order to rescue Kameo's mother. This final stretch just throws endless waves of enemies at you, but it's not tense or exciting. You can stick to 1 or 2 elementals and spam attacks. It's more of a battle of patience than skill. It turns out that Kameo is actually adopted, which helps explain why Kameo's sister Callus turned into Varuk Assault after Kameo was given the powers instead of her. And it also turns out that the Mystic is behind a lot of this because she planted the idea into Callus's head that she should ally with the trolls when Kameo was given the powers instead of Callus. And at the end of it all, the big bad troll named Thorn, which I honestly didn't know his name until I got to this scene, he ends up confessing that he actually used Callus to get stronger and that he's gonna take over the world.
Of course!
So Callus turns and sacrifices herself to turn Thorn to stone because she can do that, I guess. And then no one deals with the Mystic as the credits roll. Kameo Elements of Power is a game with an identity crisis. It's part platformer, part action brawler, part companion collector, and you can wrap all that up into this plot about an elf girl trying to save a land that you aren't made to care about from forces you don't know, and the whole thing is this bland, boring, completely forgettable mess, which is all the more disappointing when it comes from Rare, the developers behind some of the most beloved games. Apparently, Rare initially wanted this to be more of a Pokemon type game until Microsoft acquired them and made them change some things around. Kameo was supposed to also be a fairy, which is why she has these wings, but then Microsoft told them to change over to the elf because apparently that would hit more with modern audiences. I don't know. Doesn't really make any sense either way to me. And also, apparently Rare planned to make a sequel, but Microsoft scrapped it because sales figures were just okay. There was nothing special about them. Especially for a launch title, you expected more. And if you look into it, there are still people that love this game, of course. There are people who love every game, but it never really made much of an impact on Xbox's reputation, even though Xbox still tries to think it does and puts it into Xbox Game Pass and all of its first-party advertising. If this was your one and only launch title for the Xbox 360, I bet you were probably a little disappointed. From a technical perspective, this did exactly what it needed to do to showcase the power of the Xbox 360 with its big landscapes, the large number of enemies on screen at the time, which was an actual advancement. But the novelty wore off pretty quickly. This wasn't the game that people were running out to get Xbox 360s to play, and if you played this at a demo kiosk or at a friend's house, it certainly wasn't good enough to justify buying the latest console. It's a little hard to believe it, but it's already been 20 years since the launch of the Xbox 360, all the way back in November of 2005. So I decided to revisit all of the titles available at the launch of the Xbox 360, and because there are 17 games to play and revisit, I enlisted the help of my buddy Gloom is Dead. He makes incredibly thoughtful and introspective reviews of games from the golden era. If you want to see more, you can find a link to our playlist covering all 17 games in the pinned comment below.